speaker of the session, Gilad Abiri. Gilad Abiri is a Juris Doctor candidate at Yale Law School, where he also completed his LL.M degree in 2016. Before coming to Yale, Gilad earned his LL.M degree, summa laude, from Tel-Aviv University. Gilad's academic interests lie in the intersection of political theory and law, and focus on constitutional law, law and religion, and democratic law. In his Juris Doctor dissertation, he develops a new theoretical account on the tense relationship between liberal states and religious groups. His lecture today is entitled The Clashing Sovereigns in Law and Religion.
So I think it's fortunate and unfortunate to follow Ned, I think, a little bit, because I have so much to say and so many thoughts about how my very theoretical work interacts with her incredible empirical findings, but I'll need to think about it more, and I'll just go with my paper. My paper does many things. It's a bit long, so I will take an approach of just trying to distill the main idea and present it in a separate argument than the way it works in the paper. The paper is more nuanced, there's more hedging there, and I'll just try and just proclaim what I think, and then I'll be very happy to hear strong criticisms afterwards. Okay, so the relationship between religious groups and modern nation states are very challenging. In quite a few states, religious groups represent some sort of threat or challenge to the current constitutional and political structure. Take, for example, in India, the Hindu nationalist ruling party, the BJP, and the way they are now interacting with India's secular, very secular constitution, or in the US, the way the Christian right reinterprets the separation of church and state, or in Israel there are many examples, but across the board there are many social and political strifes around both religious Zionism and variations of ultra-Orthodoxy. Now, one of the main arenas that the state or a society tries to resolve these issues through constitutional courts. This is where these conflicts are supposed to have some sort of resolution. In my paper, I first try and argue that there is some sort of common, very basic account, liberal, that many of these jurisdictions hold together. I think I argue that this account is insufficient to actually make any sense of what's actually going on in many places, and I offer an alternative account which is based on the idea of a competition over final authority or sovereignty. So I'll divide this talk into three parts. The first one, I'll just explain what I mean by the standard account, which is a very basic account, and I'm then try and present the alternative account of law and religion as a competition over sovereignty, which is based or inspired by the work of Thomas Hobbes mainly, but a few other contrarians also. Contractarians maybe. And then finally, in a very tentative way, I'll try and intuitively say why I think the sovereign account is better than the standard account. So that's the structure of the argument, and let's begin. So what are the two premises that I think exist in the standard account, which is shared by many political theorists and a lot of case law, let's say? The first is that the disagreement between law and religion is about content. It's about values. Liberal values, let's say, but it doesn't have to be liberal values, versus religious values of many varieties. That's number one. Number two is that if you regulate this disagreement somehow over values through, let's say, the application of freedom of religion or defending people's freedom of conscience or a variety of other things, then this will take care of the conflict, at least to a sufficient level. So you can have social stability and political legitimacy, and you'll have a continuation of whatever you have going on now. So that's the two premises of the standard account. I'll just give a really banal example, but let's take the very famous case of Wisconsin versus Yoder. You have three Amish children who stopped going to school. Their parents withdrew them from school, from state school in Wisconsin after the 8th grade. The state does what it does. They fine the parents, they go to court. The court fines the parents for like $50 or something like that. And the parents appeal. Both the Wisconsin and the United States Supreme Courts find in favor of the parents, saying that their freedom of religion outweighs the interest of the state in educating children. Now, I think it's pretty clear that my very basic standard account exists here. On the one hand, the conflict is about values. It is the value of educating kids for, let's say, autonomy or social or economic reasons, on the one hand, and the value of religious well-being or salvation, on the other hand, which requires limiting certain educations in order to keep the children intact. And it's also, I think, implicit that if we do this to the Amish, if we let them do this, we'll have less conflicts, right? Because they'll be able to have their own thing and there will be no place of where the values are in conflict. So that's where I think, basically how I think it exists in case law. Now, it's also central, I think, obvious to a lot of political theory. And I'll just give one example, or a D example. John Rawls states that the problem liberal citizens have with their religious peers is that they have irreconcilable comprehensive doctrines, meaning their worldviews or conceptions of the good are such that they cannot explain to one another what they want to achieve through the state or in the political. Now, for him, justification of mutual policies, for him and for many others, is the basic good that allows for stability or political legitimacy. Without this, you have a problem. Now, for him, he has a solution, which is to try and regulate public speech to adhere to what he calls public reason, which is very basically the idea that all reasons given or justifying political policies are ones that can be understood by everyone else, i.e. not religious reasons. And if you do this, then you'll have what he calls political liberalism, and you'll have a legitimate state, and everything will be good. So Rawls, I think, is then a good representative of the standard account. He thinks it's about a disagreement over content, values, and if you regulate it in a certain way, then everything will be good. So that's part one, standard account. Part two is my alternative. Now, I suggest that in order to complement, not replace this standard account, we need to add a theory that looks at the tension between sovereignty or supreme authority of the state and religion. Now, I understand political sovereignty for this presentation to mean very broadly in Westphalian lines, final supreme authority of like a defined territory. In particular, I suggest that the tension or the social anxiety and legal anxiety that is found in both the fact that religious rules call for this final authority, and that the state, to a large extent, calls for this final authority. Now, as I said earlier, my account is not new. It's already found in Thomas Hobbes's work, and he saw independent religion as a threat to the unity of the sovereign. And for him, the unity of the sovereign is what allows political stability, because if the sovereign is divided from him, it means you're going to have war. You're going to have a civil war, because you have two things that can call for supreme authority. And I'll just quote him, specifically on the case of religion. It is impossible a commonwealth to stand where any other than the sovereign hath a power of giving greater rewards than life, and of inflicting greater punishments than death. This means that for him, the issue with religion and state is found in what they share. They both demand final supreme authority and are both deeply normative. Now, he has a solution. He suggests that you need basically a state church. The sovereign is a direct commander of, and he decides the interpretation of scripture, which is very central for Hobbes. And because he decides on the interpretation of scripture, there's no clash of authorities. There's no clash of laws. But let's leave that aside. Now, as I said earlier, this analysis is fueled by the attributes he gives to sovereignty, which is supremacy and indivisibility. And it's clear, I think, that if you have a conception of the sovereign as supreme and indivisible, you have a problem if you have another source of a claim for supreme authority. That's, I think, what fuels his analysis. Now, for us today, and I'll make a very intuitive argument about this, I think it's hard to just accept willy-nilly his analysis for two major reasons, or at least two major reasons. One, I think many of us bought the Madisonian kind of idea that a separation of power or a division of power in a very deep way is actually constitutive of and not undermining social stability, right? Because if you have a competition of a government, it creates less centrality of power and there's less tyranny. So that's one. Second is also our intuitive understanding of power has I think, shifted quite dramatically, and it's very hard for us to accept a supreme authority and united authority in societies where we believe the market has independent authority, civil society has independent authority, the judiciary has independent authority. It's hard for us to accept. So again, if I want to adopt Hobbes' idea, then I need to do something about the fact that his idea of sovereignty is, I think, not intuitive for us today. And my suggestion is basically that his analysis, the power of his analysis, I think, does not actually lie in the positive reality of this division of power or this challenge. You don't actually have to have one supreme authority over a state in order for this to pose a challenge for religious groups and for religious groups to pose a challenge for this. All that is needed, and this is kind of where I go to Charles Taylor, political imaginary or social imaginary, is that this sovereign is a strong cultural force, meaning that the idea of how we as a society or the people understand the political have a central authority of sovereignty. In modernity, this is usually the popular sovereign, the people, we the people. So if we imagine this existence of an all-power, a supreme entity, and this also goes into Carl Schmitt and the state of exception, if we imagine this to exist, this is enough for us to, I think, take the Hobbesian analysis of church and state very seriously. Now, if we accept what I just suggested, then we can think of two challenges that religious groups pose for the state, and maybe also vice versa. One is a religious group can be a source of a revolution. So let's think Iranian revolution kind of thing. Or the second one is a bit more elusive, and if we have the function of the sovereign as a crucial part of a nation's political imaginary, I think it's reliant on a narrative, usually one of sacrifice and founding. And this narrative, I think, is vulnerable to competing stories. It can be undermined and ridiculed. It can be made to seem unreal and unimportant. And that's an issue if you think sovereignty is a good thing. In other words, the challenge religious groups hold for sovereignty is that they can offer a powerful alternative political narrative. This alternative narrative is very strong in the case of religion. Hobbes, for example, thought that religion is especially threatening. He thought, for example, also national sovereigns, other national sovereigns are a problem, but a religious sovereign is even more of a problem because he thought a religious sovereign has a claim for an eternal authority. And indeed, when we contrast with the eternal, our human institutions are seen devoid of inherent sanctity or immortality. Okay, so that's the second part, what I call the sovereign account of law and religion, and a bit about Hobbes. And now, very tentatively and intuitively, I'll just make two statements about why I think this makes better sense of how we commonly imagine the relation of law and religion. And first, the sovereignty account gives, I think, a better explanation for the sheer drama and anxiety we find around these topics. It helps us understand the seeming disproportion between the mundane content of many of the disagreement over law and religion and the social upheaval they create. For example, this is a bit of a populist example, but there were two kids in Switzerland a few years ago that refused to shake the hand of their teacher, right? Because she was a woman and they had religious reasons not to do so. See, in like the common account, the standard account, it's very hard to understand why there was such huge upheaval around this. But if you put it in the context of a competition over sovereignty, over who is the ultimate decider in this case, then you start understanding what was going on in Switzerland in that time, I think. Now the second, the sovereign account also helps us understand, I think, the intransigence that we usually consider a part of law and religion. For example, the continuation of conflict in the face of extreme accommodation by the state. So I think the Israeli state, I think, is very easy to say, is extremely accommodationist in the case of, say, the ultra-Orthodox. They fund their school system without having any control of the curriculum, or very minimal control of the curriculum. They exempt them from civil and military service. while most of the other population is not exempt. And basically, I think, let's say, they have as good a protection on their religious rights as can exist almost. But yet, if you know anything, you know that this is a serious conflict, very much alive and kicking, both in legal and political talk. In summary, the goal, I have one more minute, so it's over. The goal of my essay was to present and make somewhat plausible the theory of the clash of sovereigns in law and religion. It is my position that this account is compelling. However, the standard account, as I called it, is not only what I just presented, which is kind of like a make sense type of theory. It is also a normative theory. It says it has sort of a position of how to regulate this. And I did not present here, nor is it in the paper, the normative edge of the sovereign account, which is something I hope to, this is the first part of my dissertation, and I hope in the unwritten parts of it to develop this more, what exactly does this compel us to do or ask us to do. Thank you very much.
So thank you, Gilad, for your presentation. And now we have time for questions and comments and discussion. Yes.
Well, I find this very compelling, and I think it does a lot of very good work. I like this idea of, I also quoted Charles Taylor to do the same work, the competing narratives, political narratives. But I have a technical question.
Yeah.
Because you use Hobbes to do a lot of work.
Yeah.
And you probably know Schmidt has a critique of Hobbes, and it has to do with the limitation of this official civil religion that he felt he needed, which is consistent, obviously, with your theory. He said that the right of private conscience that Hobbes allowed ultimately was sort of like a liberal cancer that led to the ultimate downfall of the kind of nation state that Hobbes authored. And this is the fundamental Schmittian critique of the breakdown of sovereign authority. And I'm just wondering if you have anything to say in regard to that critique.
So that's a part of the sacrifice of the paper for the presentation part.
Yeah.
So in the paper, there's basically half of the paper is almost trying to say, take Hobbes and move him into political theology. So I start with the Hobbesian analysis, critique it, and then go through what the cultural shift, the shift into political imaginary or social imaginary, and end up with Schmidt. So if you put me Hobbes versus Schmidt, I will take Schmidt's side. I think sovereignty is more dramatic than as a cultural force than this contract problem in Hobbes allows it to be. So it will be, if you want me somewhere, I am with Paul Kahn, let's say Paul Kahn more than Carl Schmitt, as the call for sacrifice and the presence of sovereignty today in nation states, I think, is very strong, and it is not, yeah, something like that.
I want to probe you, continue to probe you on your interpretation of Hobbes. I just want to get some clarity first. Are you simply endorsing his idea that religions and governments or worldly sovereigns can compete for temporal power, or are you adopting what appears to be a more radical thesis that he advances, which is that religion is nothing but a ghost or a shadow of temporal power? I have a quote here from a paper I wrote recently. Temporal and spiritual government are but two words brought into the world to make men see double and mistake their lawful sovereign. Now, he's referring to the Pope here clearly. And this does not mean necessarily that Hobbes believed that all religious systems aspired to sovereignty, because we know also that he interpreted, he brought over or carried over in a certain way the traditional Christian idea, which got a lot of play in the 17th century, as Eric Nelson and others have shown, that there was something distinctive about the Hebrew Republic or Jewish theocracy, where God ruled directly, but that following the gospel dispensation, there was a split between religion and politics. And in part, you can read Hobbes to say that's the failure to observe that split that leads to problems, or you could take the alternative reading that Hobbes thinks that religions are nothing more but shadows of sovereignty, right? As in one place, I think he says that the Pope is simply, sitting on the ghost of the Roman Empire. And there's some discourse on this now also with Naomi Goldenberg at Ottawa, her theory of religions as vestigial sovereignties that were originally instantiated in national communities, which have become ethnic minorities in many instances. Just wondered what your reading of Hobbes is. Is there still a distinction between religion and politics then?
So I will not say what my reading of Hobbes is, because the point of the paper is not to have like a strong reading of Hobbes. It is to use him as a tool or an inspiration for the argument. But I will say that my argument is strongly invested in the similarity of religion and the sovereign, and weakly invested in the fact that religion does have something unique in it, which I alluded to when I said something to do with the eternal. So that's kind of my answer, and this is why I was very excited, by the way, when I read the call for papers for this conference, because the first paragraph of the call for papers was almost verbatim in my paper before the conference. So I was very excited about it. I don't know if that's a good enough answer, but that's what I have.
So, other questions? Please.
I find your account very convincing in terms of practice. That is to say that when there is conflict, it may very well be that each party to the conflict imagines that their goal is to have sovereignty in the way that you've described it. I have a slight concern, which is that by accepting that definition or that self-understanding of religion, it may sort of block out other alternative understandings or histories. So talking about Jewish law, which I know best, for most of Jewish history, arguably until the establishment of the State of Israel, even utopian messianic ideas of what a halakhic Jewish state would look like did not maintain that halakha would be the exclusive law of the state, or even the primary law of the state, because it was acknowledged that halakha didn't have the capacity to actually govern a state in practice. And that raises the concern that this understanding of religion as having a claim to sovereignty is taking what I think is a sort of absorption by religious ideology of essentially modern European ideas of the sovereignty of nation states and absorbing it and understanding it to be their goal as well. So this isn't to challenge your account of why the conflicts arise, but when it gets to normative questions, which you in your paper but you didn't present, I wonder if another avenue might be, rather than sort of regulating the clash of sovereignties, to actually think about recovering some of these other non-sovereign conceptions of religion.
So I think that's a really good comment. No, really. And I need to think about it further, but I'll just say that I don't think to say that religion has a claim for sovereignty or supreme authority means that the vision needs to be replace religious law, to replace state law with religious law. Meaning, I'm not invested in the argument that you need to think that it's realistic for halakha to take over the state in order for you to be claiming for sovereign authority. You can just say, in a more simple way, my source of authority, and I'm not even invested in this being the divine so much, is the supreme. When there is a clash of authorities, a clash of powers, this is what comes out. And I'm saying that this type of dynamic creates tension. It's not even an argument that this kind of dynamic leads to, it's not a Hobbesian dynamic that says this will lead to civil war or something like that. I'm saying, I think this explains why we have so much anxiety and so much tension around this phenomenon. But that being said, I think what you said is really interesting, and I need to think about it more.
Time for another question, maybe a short one.
I think this is really the same question. It's a kind of request for clarification. So I'm just, still stuck on your reading of Hobbes and just wondering why you think he's representative at the level of the social imaginary, such that we can track conflicts before and after his thought with his view. So, as has already been stated, many or most theologies involve God sharing power on earth. So he's willing to divide sovereignty in a sense. So that's the theory of rendering unto Caesar, dine malcuta dina. And then in the modern state, it's not Hobbesian, because most modern states say there's going to be a zone in which God can rule, at least those who accept him as their sovereign. And then there's not really a contest over sovereignty understood as final authority, but just the negotiation of the power-sharing arrangement with everyone accepting that there's, in a sense, dual sovereignty. And of course there's friction. But what that's not is competition over sovereignty understood as absolutely supreme authority.
So I think the argument is, first of all, reliant on an idea of separation between government and sovereignty, a type of sleeping sovereign. So this already exists in Hobbes, where you have an idea in which the sovereign is not always active. So the idea that power is divided in society or in politics, that religious has some power and the state has some power, is not a problem in this regard. It becomes problematic in areas where sovereignty, I think, is apparent and clear. So I'll just take one account of this, who, as you see, is in my doctoral committee, so is influential. Paul Kahn's account on the idea of sacrifice, the call for sacrifice, as something that unites the sovereign community or the nation state. So let's say the call for draft, or the idea that the sovereign can call you to sacrifice. So sometimes that is a very real clash on supreme authority, because you say, okay, religious community, please do this, or religious community feels that they're called to do this, and that becomes a real clash. And again, and it's not only this call to sacrifice, you could say that there are other locations within the modern state, mainly the locations where you actually have conflict of law and religion, I think, where sovereignty is very apparent and upfront, and where you have more problems. Does that do the work? Okay.
So thank you very much.